The episode called The Younger Dryas, which I and others pinned down as perhaps one of the most important episodes in, let's use the word loosely, the relatively recent story of the human race. Remember that human beings, anatomically modern human beings, have been around for at least 300,000 years, possibly more than that. The date keeps on getting pushed back.
Officially?
But yes, we have skeletal remains from Morocco, which are anatomically modern humans, and they're 300,000 years old.
It doesn't really work with Darwin's evolution theory.
I don't think it's a problem for. I don't think it's a problem for evolutionary theory.
Okay.
We can talk about evolutionary theory. That's another.
That's an interesting one. It's a theory
altogether.
Yeah.
And perhaps we'll come on to that. But before I lose my chain of thought, the plain fact of the matter, and it's a phrase that my kids have embossed on one of my T-shirts, is that stuff keeps on getting older. And by that, what I mean is that the story of anatomically modern humans keeps on getting older. Our species has been around for a very long time, and we now know that there were closely related species such as the Neanderthals, such as the Denisovans, who go back even earlier than 300,000 years ago, who definitely possessed the same symbolic abilities that we did. We're beginning to dispense with the notion of Neanderthals as thuggish, stupid brutes, and we're beginning to realize that they were highly intelligent, sophisticated species. The thing is that as you push the horizons further and further back, you get to a place where there's actually plenty of room for something that we would recognize as a civilization to develop and to be destroyed. You know, it used to be believed, not so long ago, that there had been no anatomically modern humans before about 40,000 years ago. That's a much tighter time frame, but once you push that back to 300,000 years ago, vast expanses of time open up, in which all kinds of things could have happened that aren't yet properly documented.
Yeah.
So I think that archaeology has failed to get to grips with this. I think I've failed to get to grips with the implications of this. And when there are myths or traditions or accounts like the account of Plato, which should require them to think again, they don't think again, they just dismiss them in any possible way. And that's where it becomes propagandistic. Basically, they're thinking, this is an annoying story which conflicts with our picture of the past. How can we get rid of it? Let's say Plato just made it all up.
Yeah, that's convenient.
It's convenient.
Yeah, but it doesn't satisfy my curiosity, and it doesn't satisfy a lot of people. So I guess that's why we're calling the holes more and more in their narrative, and that's probably why you're being considered dangerous. Yeah, because you're a threat to the narrative, the official narrative.
I'm a threat to the official narrative.
Yeah,
and what archaeologists have tried to do in calling me dangerous and saying that I'm a threat to the official narrative is saying, goodness knows what's going to happen next. If people start questioning us, they're going to question everything else.
The election, how dangerous is it to question our government? And that's where I'm like, is it really a bad thing to question and think for yourself? But it seems to be nowadays.
Well, it should be a positive thing. It's a fundamental human quality, but it's not. It's some. I mean, as I mentioned, I've been under attack from archaeologists since the mid 1990s.
And that goes back to the question I had earlier.
And I knew when I presented Ancient Apocalypse, I knew that the series would be attacked by archaeologists because I'd been dealing with it for 30 years.
Exactly, you know what it's like.
I knew that it was coming, and that's why I said in the series that archaeologists regard me as public enemy number one, and they went ahead and proved me right by the way that they.
I think that's a good thing that you address it, because it's like it's on the table and you address it right up from the bat, so we know. And
I don't want them saying that Hancock claims he's an archaeologist, because I don't.
You don't.
I detest the word pseudo-archaeologist or pseudo-scientist. This is where let's not underestimate the power of Wikipedia. If people have something they want to find out about, they've heard a little word, they've heard of somebody called Graham Hancock who's saying, maybe there's a lost civilization, maybe there's a forgotten episode. The first place they go is Wikipedia. It's just easily accessed. And it's not understood that Wikipedia is not an objective encyclopedia at all. Wikipedia is run by interest groups.
Yeah.
And it happens that the editors who handle my page, who have locked it to the public cannot re-edit my page. If they do attempt to re-edit, the edits are removed immediately. Yeah. It happens that the very group of archaeologists who were attacking me in 1995 are the group who run my Wikipedia page.
Wow.
So this cannot be an objective source.
I didn't go and read it, but I'm sure it's very interesting to read.
The first thing they do is the Graham Hancock promotes pseudo-archaeological theories. So that's the way that's the language they use to dismiss something that they don't like. They call it pseudo-archaeological. Now, the word pseudo, if I understand the etymology correct, means false archaeological theories. And I don't know how they know that. I don't know what right they have to say that.
Yeah.
I am simply saying that I don't agree with what they say.
Yeah.
And I'm presenting evidence.
In
I've written a large number of books.
Yeah.
These books are of very great length. Some of them have as many as 2,000 footnotes in them. I reference all my sources very, very carefully. I can't be a pseudo-archaeologist if I don't claim to be an archaeologist.
Exactly.
I claim to be what I am, a writer with a background in journalism who attempts to do very thorough and detailed research.
So do you have other scientists or archaeologists that are backing your theories?
No.
No? Okay.
Not really.
Okay.
There are certain areas. I've taken a great interest in what's called the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis.
Yeah.
The Younger Dryas is a fascinating episode in human prehistory.
It's 1,200 years?
Well, we know that roughly 12,800 years ago, for the 1,000 or 2,000 years before that, the world had been warming up, and there had been a gradual meltdown of the ice sheets. Then suddenly the world went into a very intense cold period. Became extremely cold.
Everywhere on the planet.
Everywhere on the planet. It was a global phenomenon. And this cold period lasted for about 1,200 years until 11,600 years ago. And then the world very rapidly warmed up again. I mean, let's be clear. The concern about climate change today is nothing, just minuscule by comparison with what happened during the Younger Dryas. Those huge climate shifts from getting warm to getting incredibly cold, from being incredibly cold for 1,200 years and then getting massively warm again suddenly. Nothing like that is happening
suddenly,
today.
Like, what are we talking? Like a human lifetime?
We're talking about a human lifetime, yeah. Very, very fast.
Okay.
Very, very, very quick.
And could it be a pole shift, or we're not discussing a pole shift here?
I don't know if it was a pole shift. The answer, that's a matter we should pay attention to. And I paid attention to that in my book, Fingerprints of the Gods, in 1995. Yeah. But what happened since 2007 was that a group of real scientists, not journalists,
not a pseudo-archaeologist like you,
a group of real scientists began to wonder if there had been a series of impacts from fragments of a disintegrating comet around 12,800 years ago. And they did so on the basis of what is called the Younger Dryas boundary layer. And you can see it exposed in a number of places. Murray Springs in Arizona.
You go there in your series.
I do.
Yeah.
And you can see that it's a layer in the soil which is about the thickness of a human hand. And it's very dark. It's often called the black mat. And it's full of objects, nanodiamonds, melt glass, platinum. It's full of objects that are best explained by an extraterrestrial impact. I don't mean aliens. I mean fundamentally a comet that breaks up into multiple fragments. A lot of the criticism of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis has been, where's the crater? But that's not what the hypothesis proposes. It proposes that a very large comet, perhaps as much as 100 kilometers, maybe 200 kilometers in diameter, entered the inner solar system.
It fragmented into
Well,
smaller
it entered
parts?
the inner solar system intact, in their view, around 20,000 years ago.
Wow.
And it went into an orbit that crossed the orbit of the Earth. But because of gravitational forces, this is very common for comets. No scientist would deny this. Comets fragment. They break up into multiple pieces.
Yeah.
And when they do so, instead of having one large object, you have tens of thousands of smaller objects that spread out into a very wide meteor stream. And in the case of the what's called the Torrid meteor stream, which is believed to be the culprit in this case. You're looking at a meteor stream that's 30 million kilometers wide. The Earth takes 12 and a half days to pass through it on its orbit, and it passes through the Torrid meteor stream twice a year.
Oh, wow.
And it still does. The suggestion is that 12,800 years ago, some very large fragments in that meteor stream hit the Earth. They didn't, in most cases, actually impact with the surface of the Earth. They were air bursts. They broke up in the atmosphere.
Okay.
And we can have a very recent example of that, which is the Tunguska event in Siberia, which took place on the 30th of June, 1908. That was a fragment, almost certainly out of the Torrid meteor stream, that was no more than 100 meters in diameter. It didn't reach the surface of the Earth. It exploded in the sky. And this is usually what happens with air bursts.
And it still had an impact?
It had a massive impact.
So why does
it flattened 80 million trees across 2,000 square kilometers. It was fortunate for the human race that this was in an uninhabited area of the Earth. But when researchers went there, they found this massive devastation. And if the Tunguska event had happened over a major city, the entire population of that city would have been destroyed. And what is proposed in the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, there may well have been impacts with the surface of the Earth, but the primary focus of those was on the North American and the Northern European ice caps. Now, let's remember that 12,800 years ago, those ice caps were still a couple of kilometers deep. So if you have an object half a kilometer wide that doesn't explode in the atmosphere but hits an ice cap, it's not going to leave a crater in the ground below. It's going to create a crater in the ice cap, and when the ice melts away, that crater will no longer be visible.
So it doesn't leave a trace.
It leaves a trace in the Younger Dryas boundary layer, which is all over the world. It's found in North America, it's found in South America, it's found in Belgium, it's found in
and
as
somehow
far east
it's
as
not
Syria.
Officially accepted?
No, it's accepted that it exists, but it's disputed as to what caused it.
Okay.
And those scientists who proposed the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis have themselves come under a great deal of criticism, and still do. Because there are others who are invested in other theories who don't like it. For example, the theory that the great megafauna of the Ice Age, the woolly mammoths, the woolly rhinos, the mastodons, the giant sloths, they all went extinct during the Younger Dryas. They all went extinct between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. There's a huge body of opinion in archaeology that wants to claim that extinction of the megafauna was caused by overhunting by human beings.
We like to put every responsibility on the human
beings.
Responsible
and therefore, those who are invested in that notion find the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis a threat, because if the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is correct, then those animals were not made extinct by overhunting. And I can't think of a single hunter-gatherer society in the world today, and some still exist, which overhunt.
Never happened.
They live in harmony with the creatures that they survive upon. They would never wipe them out. And I don't think human beings wiped out the megafauna either. I think the best explanation for the wiping out of the megafauna is this series of impacts of comet fragments all around the world, and the climate change that followed. See, at the moment, it's fully accepted that there was a massive climate change at the beginning of the Younger Dryas, 12,800 years ago, and another massive climate change 11,600 years ago at the end of the Younger Dryas. But the explanation is completely different. They say that the world went into that deep freeze because what's called the global meridional overturning circulation, of which the Gulf Stream is the best known part, was interrupted by meltwater coming off the ice caps, and they accept that as the only necessary explanation. They never ask themselves, why did the meltwater come off the ice caps? Why did it come off in huge quantities suddenly? And that's what the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis answers. It says that these air bursts and impacts on the ice caps caused the shock and the heat generated by those events, caused a sudden melting of the ice. And that ice then flowed into the world ocean and then indeed did cut the Gulf Stream.
What is the flood we're talking about, or would the flood be later on?
Well, the interesting thing, if you get into the fine details on the Younger Dryas, you will find something very puzzling. That 12,800 years ago, just as the world entered that deep freeze, sea levels rose very rapidly. That shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen. When the world is going into a freeze, all that excess water should be piled up on the ice caps. It shouldn't be going into the world ocean, and yet it did. It's been absolutely confirmed from Bahamian corals, which can only survive at a few meters under the surface of the sea. They have a very close relationship with the sea, and if the sea gets deeper than 5 meters or so above them, they drown. They can't survive anymore. The drowning of corals 12,800 years ago is clear evidence of a huge rise in sea level at that time. And then when you come to the end of the Younger Dryas, 11,600 years ago, you have this massive warming that takes place. And you have another flood then, and that's called Meltwater Pulse 1b. And that 11,600 years ago date is the date that coincides with Plato's story of Atlantis. That's when he says Atlantis went under 9,000 years before the time of Solon, 11,600 years before our time. It's the date that coincides with the date given in the Edfu building texts. And the question is, what caused that sudden warming? And on this, there is much less work being done than on the problem of the beginning of the Younger Dryas. I go back to the work of Sir Fred Hoyle, who was a great astronomer, passed away now, who long ago was looking at this problem, and he suggested that the sudden warming at the end of the Younger Dryas was caused by a comet impact, not impacting an ice cap, not air bursting, but hitting an ocean, hitting a major ocean, sending up a huge cloud of water vapor into the upper atmosphere, creating a massive instant global warming effect and resulting in this sudden rise in sea level and sudden rise in global temperatures. It's interesting because he suggested that long before the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis was ever proposed. It seemed to him the best explanation.
It's matching. It's the theory.
Well, it does. It matches the theory, because you would expect with a meteor stream, and I repeat that what is called the torrid meteor stream, which we presently pass through at the end of June and at the end of October, we pass through it twice a year, that we would expect to have not just one episode of impacts, we'd expect to have multiple episodes of impact. Just like the Tunguska event in 1908 is also from an object that I believe fell out of the torrid meteor stream, because the 30th of June 1908 coincides with the peak of what is called the beta torrids. They are the most likely culprit for that. We are in a relationship with this meteor stream, and that relationship isn't just 12,800 years old. It's a relationship that still continues today. There are very large objects still in the torrid meteor stream, some of which are fully recognized by mainstream astronomers. The best known is called Comet Encke.
Yeah, I heard about
and
that.
Comet Encke is about 6 kilometers in diameter. That's an Earth killer. If you get something like that, hits the Earth intact, and it's going to
we're
pretty much gone. We're the dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And we cross the orbit of the torrid meteor stream. Now, fortunately, it's 30 million kilometers wide. There are multiple filaments of debris, and we haven't in recent past hit a very large object, but the possibility is always there that we will, and some calculations suggest that we might do so within the next 30 or 40 years.
Well, I have a question.
I want to say something very clearly. Sure. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis provides an answer to my mystery of a lost civilization of the Ice Age. You don't lose a civilization without some kind of cataclysmic event taking place. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't suddenly disappear from the world without a great cataclysm occurring. And the best evidence for a massive cataclysm 12,800 years ago, which is around the date that I've always been proposing, even before I knew about the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, is that we have that cataclysm with the initiation, with the onset of the Younger Dryas. And I want to be clear that the scientists who have evolved the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, they're not interested in whether or not there was a lost civilization. That's not their thing. They are simply saying that there was a gigantic global cataclysm 12,800 years ago. It was a long-term event. It lasted for 1,200 years, and it saw the extinction of all the megafauna all around the world, and obviously had a huge impact on human populations. But they don't go the next step, which I go, and say that one of those human populations, perhaps several of them, were at a much more sophisticated level of development than archaeologists attribute to the peoples of the Ice Age. That's my idea.